All right, so today we have, I guess, a luminary and legend, Andrew Ng, founder of DeepLearning.AI, managing general partner at the AI Fund and Adjunct Professor at Stanford University. I guess serial entrepreneur, but also kind of a pioneer in machine learning and AI. So, Andrew, welcome to the Generative AI in the Real World podcast.
Thanks, Ben. It's always good to see you.
And I'm sure most people already know Andrew, but let's just say he's one of the first people who got the general population interested in deep learning. I mean, there was that deep learning hardcore community, and then Andrew kind of spun out of that and made it much more of something that people should pay attention to, including Google.
Now, I
So
would say back then, the controversial thing I did was I ran around saying we need to scale up deep learning algorithms. So that's why I started Google Brain, because I saw data in my lab at Stanford that building bigger neural networks with bigger computers, first biggest more CPUs and later GPUs, that drove performance. And that's actually a very controversial statement back then. So when I tell my friends, I'm going to start Google Brain because I want to use Google's computers to scale up deep learning, some of my friends, including very senior people in AI at the time, would say, "Hey, Andrew, this is weird. Why are you scaling up deep learning? Focus on the algorithms. The algorithm is where the action is at." Fortunately, I was willing to, unfortunately, I had enough data that I had internal conviction and I did that and that worked out. But it's actually pretty controversial back then when I told people we should scale up models.
now, at the risk of dating Andrew, but correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but you were also one of the first people who told the rest of us pay attention to CUDA and GPUs, right?
Oh, yeah, I think my team at Stanford, I think we wrote the first research paper saying that we should use CUDA to scale up deep learning. We weren't the first to look at GPUs for AI, but CUDA was to me, the tipping point, because before CUDA, it was really difficult, to do GPU, general purpose GPU. But to me, CUDA was the tipping point. So we started publishing papers saying, "Hey, everyone, take a look at CUDA and let's take a look at GPUs." I think that, wound up having to me, one of the biggest compliments is of, your work that used to be controversial is everyone just knows about it, so no one bothers to cite you anymore. And I actually feel quite happy that now, of course, you use GPUs, of course, you scale deep learning. It's good that what we used to push that was controversial is now like an obvious fact. Um,
And now,
I actually have another controversial one. Speaking of GPUs, which is I think many people still underestimate the importance of inference. So GPUs are fantastic for training. I'm actually trying to think through myself: is the hardware for inference going to be different than the best hardware for training? So there are actually multiple businesses at this moment in time working on better inference hardware, and that's actually exciting as well.
and another thing that you kind of brought to much more mainstream attention, and again, a lot of people were talking about this in academia, uh, and I guess in industry as well. But you kind of coined the term and kind of coalesced the community around data-centric AI. Is another one of these things that in retrospect, of course, right? So, but then you used your bully pulpit to kind of rally people around
See.
it, right?
Yeah, it's been really nice to see how many people are working and then pushing forward data-centric AI in a more systematic way. And I feel like I was at NeurIPS, in person last December. I was actually very happy. NeurIPS had these big banners on the big topics. So there's one for deep learning, one for, I don't remember, reinforcement learning, and there was a big banner on data-centric AI. So I was actually happy that I was able to play a small role, kind of trying to coalesce the community of people that have realized sometimes for decades, right, that entering the data is really important, sometimes even more important than entering the model for some applications. So seeing so many people, it's been a few months since I checked, but the last time I checked, the number of research papers that say data-centric AI looked like it was going up very rapidly. So I think it's an important topic. So it's good to so much work on this.
And speaking of things that you are bringing to people's attention, so I joke to people that last year the word of the year was co-pilot, and this year the word of the year seems to be agents. And in your recent newsletters, you've been writing about AI agents. Now, agents is not a new term. So what's new this time around?
So, large language model based agents are able to do things that no prior piece of technology has been able to. In fact, so the way that most people use Gen AI, say ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, as a consumer, is you write a prompt and have AI write an essay or generate output for you. But that's a bit like if you were to go to a person, or in this case, go to an AI and say, please write an essay for me on a topic, but I need you to do so by typing from start to finish in one go without ever using backspace. And, you can write like that. You probably don't do your best writing that way. And for AI, despite the difficulty of this task, I think large language models do this surprisingly well. But for humans doing writing, who writes an O'Reilly book like that? Hopefully, no one. You instead write an outline, critique the outline, do some online research, improve the outline, write a first draft, critique the draft, and it's a much more iterative process where you're writing, thinking, writing, thinking, and that's what agentic workflows let us do. Is we're using an OM over and over to have it write a draft, critique the draft, use a tool to do research, critique it, and iterate a lot more, and this results in a way better work product. So when my team looked at some data on a coding benchmark called Human Eval, we found that while the improvement in performance from GP 3.5 to GP 4 was significant, it was great that we moved from GP 3.5 to GP 4. The improvement from 3.5 to 4 is dwarfed by the improvement you get even using 3.5, but adding this type of iterative agentic workflow on top. And what at AI Fund, we've actually been seeing this for, half a year, maybe half a year now. We've been helping many of the companies we work on, that we help build, use agentic workflows, and it just gets much better performance than zero-shot prompting, which is writing from start to finish. So that's why with agentic workflows, which feels like it's kind of in its infancy, the set of tasks we can get AI to do is expanding rapidly again. Oh, and I think since I wrote that series in the newsletter, The Batch, I thought this was important enough. I just wrote for like 5 weeks in a row about this, right? Five weeks in a row, I was trying to explain different parts of agentic workflow. I think one of my friends told me, guess what, Andrew? Now that you've done this, every company is going to use the word agent, and in 6 months, the term will be totally useless and it won't mean anything.
Yeah.
It does feel like the term AI, everyone's using AI that I don't know the term is that special. I think in the next 6 months, the term agents will become, everyone will say agents, but that's a sign of progress too. I'm not complaining. I think it's good if everyone is trying their own version of agents.
Yeah, coincidentally, actually, I was talking to someone who creator of one of the more popular open source frameworks for building agents, and their description, Andrew, to me sounds almost like RPA, robotic process automation 2.0, in the following sense, right? So you take some task in the enterprise. If there's enough scale to justify automation in that task, you use their tool, and what their tool does is things like collect different documents, and then have the financial analyst summarize, have the agent financial analyst make a summary, point out anomalies and trends and things like that, right? So it's kind of like a RPA, but now backed with this foundation model.
I think agents can be used for RPA.
Yeah.
I think it's actually going to be even bigger than that.
Yeah.
So, I think that a lot of people had a ChatGPT moment when they used ChatGPT maybe for the first time and saw it significantly surpass expectations for what AI could do. I think a lot of people are going to have an agentic moment when you use a single agent or multi-agent system and it just goes and does the task, maybe by planning out how to do it in a way that was not how you would have tasked it to do, that will amaze and surprise and delight you. So I think the agentic workflow platform. So I think Joe Mora did a great job building True AI. Ting Wu and Chi Wang did a great job building AutoGen. I think Harrison Chase is doing a great job building LangGraph. So I think I see these AI agent platforms developing that makes it much easier for people to build agents on top. And to me, I've had a few really delightful moments when I had implemented, actually often a multi-agent system to do a task, and it does it in a way that was not at all what I was expecting. Like it decides to do a web search or summarize or use a tool or whatever that I really didn't tell it to take those actions, but it chose to take those actions and accomplish the task. And I think that um, so this feels different than RPA because when we give the agents planning capabilities, they start to decide on actions to take without us needing to code them up. And I don't want to say this works reliably 100% of the time. Frankly, it's like immature technology, not totally predictable. But boy, there are some moments that go, wow, that was amazing.
Speaking of coding and programming, in mapping that over to this kind of agentic workflow, so do you anticipate new forms of software applications or software that will emerge to have been built using this workflow that might not have been possible before?
Yes,
Yeah.
there will be. In fact, with agentic workflows, AI found with a lot of enterprise applications, for example, for example, reading over very complicated documents and drawing inferences accurately, right, for specific business verticals, we find that agentic workflows works way better. In fact, one example of a simple design pattern is reflection, where you have an agent generate an output, then you have it, please double check your own output, comment on the strengths and weaknesses, where might you be right or wrong, then take his own feedback to just rewrite it. It's such a simple design pattern to implement. I've been really surprised at how this simple design pattern, where you now prompt an LLM 3 times, generate a result, reflect, critique, and then use the critique to generate a new result. This generates significantly better results than zero-shot prompting. And if you let it do this a few times, sometimes we've seen for some really tricky document understanding, this gives much more accurate results. I find that the portfolio of agentic design patterns is really letting us build capabilities that I would really have struggled. I would really struggle to build any other way.
Copyright has been in the news a lot. So a lot of these uh, foundation models are probably using data or documents that may not be in the open copyright, right? Uh, what are the risks of training on copyright-free data sets? So let's say you behave and you decide you're gonna adhere strictly to only copyright-free data sets. So is there going to be any risk of degrading performance?
Wasn't sure you're asking a legal question or a technical question. Not a lawyer. I don't have can't
Sure.
comment on legal
Yeah,
matters. It
yeah,
was interesting that New York Times sued OpenAI. To me, this is actually one of the tricky questions that we as a society need to wrestle with, which is it okay for Gen AI to train on freely published content on the internet? Um, uh, and is that fair use? I have to say, I personally would like it to be considered fair use, but that's probably a legal question for the legislators and maybe the courts to sort out. I don't know where they'll come out. And I realized something because I had posted my views on social media, and I don't know, had some supporters who've also got some flack for it. I realized that there's a difference in the way I view AI and the way many others view AI. So, in the way that some people view AI, which is when I started thinking about this, I thought I'm allowed to read text on the internet, and many people we read stuff and then we don't copy it word for word. We don't play, you shouldn't plagiarize. Plagiarism we know is bad. But if you read something, learn from it, and then a week later write your own article, synthesizing things you learn on the internet in totally different words with your own opinion, that's okay, right? We learn stuff from the internet and then we form our own opinions and we write our own opinions. So I thought, if I as a human am allowed to do that, why can't I get an AI to do that for me? And I realized, but when I start to say humans could do it, why don't we let AIs do it too? I actually got some, kind of angry social media messages saying, why am I making an equivalence between humans and AI? And I realized that there was actually a pretty fundamental difference between the way my instinct is to view AI as others. I'm not saying anyone's necessarily right or wrong, which is I very much view AI as a tool that I use. So if I could do something, I often say, great, I could do this manually. Let me use AI as a tool under my control to do this thing more quickly for me. In comparison, there are also people that view AI as something distinct from themselves, not as a tool, but like almost a different thing, almost a different species, a different type of entity. And I think I don't think that insects should have the same rights as humans. So if you view AI as a different thing separate from the human, then why should AI have the same rights as humans? And maybe it shouldn't. But I realize that is that difference in philosophy. I think AI is a fantastic tool, and I dispatch it to do stuff for me. So stuff I'm allowed to do, I'm going to be able to use a tool to do. But there are people that think, well, AI is a separate thing from themselves, so we shouldn't make an equivalence between AI and humans. There's an uh, interesting divergence in philosophies, leading people to different conclusions about whether, we should dispatch AI to read a lot of articles for me, and then help me with thinking things through.
So before the rise of generative AI, right? So before the resurgence in interest in AI driven by ChatGPT, many enterprises were starting down the road of ML. So there were startups and tools around ML ops. Granted, not very many people were far down that road, but they were starting to learn things about how to build these applications, what the right steps are in terms of QA and testing and the pipelines you need, right? So now we fast forward to generative AI, and I have to say, Andrew, one of the main questions I keep getting asked is, when do we know we're ready to release that it's good enough? So things like this. So, what's your sense of the state of tooling and the state of knowledge around best practices in terms of using these things in the enterprise?
I think it's still very early. I think lots of companies are working on this, right? So I think Ways and Biases is doing a lot of work on evals. OpenAI has actually published a whole bunch of work on evals. I know that Anthropic is also doing a lot of work on evals. I feel like so first, when should we deploy it? I think it's actually very application dependent. For some internal applications, if you're routing emails or whatever, if you route the email to the wrong person, the customer support email, hopefully they'll just route to the right person. The risk is very low. And so a little bit of testing might let you feel confident in deploying it. And then there are also clearly, safety critical things that would require much higher level of testing. If you're doing, I don't know, medicine related things or medical triaging or even medical advice, clearly, things toward that in the spectrum need a much higher level of safety and robustness. But I find that I think we do need more work on evals. And one of the reasons why we're falling behind on evals is because Gen AI and LLMs in particular have made it so easy to build applications. So if you can build an application in, let's say, a week, it's just no fun if you now need to spend 10 weeks to collect a data set and label it and then do eval. So what I see a lot of teams will build stuff and then, maybe try to deploy it in a safe way. But when it used to take you, I don't know, 20 weeks to build an AI system, maybe spending 10 weeks collecting data, that's fine. But if it takes you 1 week to build a system, then spending 10 times longer, I made up the numbers, maybe it's not 10 times, but spending so much more time on data is just less fun. But this is actually one of the problems I spend, some of my weekend and spare time thinking about is how to help evals come along. One of the side effects I see for this as well is a lot of people will build their application on one LLM and then not switch. Because if you can't evaluate your application, if I switch, will performance improve, get worse? Is it the same? Going to use a cheaper API call and not have it degrade? Very hard to know answers to those questions unless you're better evals, which is why. And then also agentic workflows. You can write an AI to write, I don't know, blog posts for you, right? Or draft, whatever for you. How do I know is it good or bad? If I change my agentic workflow, maybe I add an extra reviewer. I'm going to create an extra agent to review it, critique it one more round. Does it make a difference, or am I slowing my workflow down for no reason? How do you evaluate blog posts? Because it's so expensive to evaluate it, if you need to get humans to read it and judge it, evals is a real problem, and you can get evals working better. That will unlock, I think, much faster development.
So it seems like we now have a steady supply of LLMs, some open. The best one seems to be proprietary. The open ones, people are working hard to run on different hardware. Some run on laptops, even, right? So clearly, companies are interested in a mix of different LLM and LLM providers. So one of the things that worries me a little bit, Andrew, is that on the open side, I guess we have a few suppliers. I mean, Meta is the main supplier. Mistral Large is no longer open. Databricks and Snowflake announced open LLMs, but they've only released one. So we've got to see if they're going to follow up with a steady stream of updates. So we're down to one supplier, Meta. So that worries me a little bit. Should I be worried?
I think Meta's done a really nice job with Llama 2 and Llama 3. I think that, so they've really moved the needle.
Yeah.
I feel like I think if Meta doesn't do it, I'm optimistic others will step into the fray. So I think, for example, didn't Cohere release Command R or Command R Plus or something that was under?
But is it good? I mean, no, people aren't talking about it as much as Llama 3, for example, right?
Oh, well, I think that, Meta did really good technical work. It also has the advantage of a huge PR engine, which is not to take away from the strength of the technical work or the gratitude and I hope many of us have for their open source releases. And I think, I think that, interestingly, one of the, let's see, Mistral's done very good open source work. Alibaba released an open model that was actually pretty good. I think that different countries, I think, Middle East, many Middle Eastern countries are also, I think Falcon model was one example. I think there are actually quite a lot of players in releasing open models. And one of the things that makes me cautiously optimistic is that the cost of training seems to be falling. And so there's actually a report from ARC, the investment firm, where they estimated that training costs are falling 75% per year. I don't know if this is the right number, but their estimate, not mine, is training costs are falling 75% per year, which means that the model that costs $100 million to train this year, maybe it'll cost $25 million to train next year, if they're right. But I think falling model cost prices hopefully means that the ability to train lots of models becomes more and more open to lots of players. And if the open source, ends up being a little bit behind the proprietary models, probably not the end of the world. But I do think we need to keep on investing in open source and supporting open source and showing gratitude to the many teams building this fantastic open source work.
Yeah, and I know you have to go, but I have one question I've been dying to ask you, which is, maybe I'm misremembering this, but through the years, I think I've noticed that you're not that high on reinforcement learning. And so I wanted to ask you, is that still the case, or am I wrong in remembering it that way, or
Yeah, so I think, for actually my PhD thesis, this is a while back, was on using reinforcement learning to fly drones, to fly autonomous helicopters. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes you see a path for a technology to break away and really lift off. Reinforcement learning turned out to be really important for RLHF, but reinforcement learning for robotics, is great. I believe in it, but I wasn't convinced that it was reaching that breakaway moment just yet. There's a lot of excitement about training foundation models for robots, so I think hopefully that will help. But I felt that it was difficult to get the data. So in 2020, I wrote an article in the Badge talk about GPT-3. So I was fortunate to be able to call it, quite a long time before the release of ChatGPT like a little bit more than 2 years later. But in 2020, this is all public, it's on the internet, so I'm not making this up. I said that with the release of GPT-3, I was seeing entrepreneurs working with AI Fund build applications of GPT-3. Further, it was already clear to me back then that there was a clear path to scaling, driving better performance. And I think, fortunately, or whatever, those predictions turned out to be largely right. And I'm just having a hard time seeing a similar story. For a long time, I've had a hard time seeing a similar story for why scale or some mechanism would cause reinforcement learning to lift off. To be fair, it did lift off for RLHF, for aligning Gen AI
And
model.
and AlphaGo.
I think AlphaGo was a fantastic
One-off.
project. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the translation of reinforcement learning to business applications and creating widespread commercial value, I think it's been a less direct path than many other than certain other. But honestly, we should keep working on it. Hey, long term, a lot of things that used to not work in AI suddenly works a year or two from now. So just be clear, I think we should work on reinforcement learning. We as a society should keep working on reinforcement learning. But I think we should keep on exploring many different technologies and see how we can make it take off. And I don't know, I'm seeing encouraging signs in robotics with robotics foundation models. But again, although a lot of it is imitation learning rather than reinforcement learning, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Now hopefully, things will still remain relatively open because transformers, right? So that innovation happened in the before times when people were talking more openly and publishing more detailed papers. Now, when you look at the release notes of LLMs, they're much more high level, much more vague. So, is it possible that the next innovation like transformers never gets published?
Yeah, we'll see. I think I don't know. I think I find recent innovations like NAMVER, state-space models. We'll see how strong an alternative to transformers that proves out. It's still a little bit early, but some parts of it looks promising. So I think there's so many people working on AI now that while some things may be proprietary for a limited amount of time, as talent circulates, as ideas circulate, I think that it's actually really difficult to keep technical ideas secret for a long time. Easier for businesses to keep data secret for a long time, but I'm optimistic. But frankly, I think it's up to all of us. I think it's up to everyone watching this. It's up to all of us to keep pushing for openness and to keep advancing AI together.
And with that, thank you, Andrew.
No, thanks a lot, Ben. It's always fun to chat with you.
Yeah.